OK，各位，唔好意思，我哋好似遲咗少少，不過我哋等多2分鐘，等多啲朋友加入我哋先至一次過開始。好啦，各位，我哋不如熱一熱身先啊！等我講少少 house rule welcome 咗大家先啦。咁就首先歡迎大家參加我哋今日有關於美國 EB5 program 嘅 webinar 啦。咁其實近期咧，我諗尤其是拜登上咗場之後咧，其實我哋都見到多咗好多人問有關於 EB5 嘅問題嘅。咁坊間咧，固之然都好多 EB5 嘅講座啦。咁但係我想講我嘅重點咧，就係我哋今日呢一場 webinar 與別不同之處咧，係我哋揾咗幾個喺成個 EB5 進程入邊，其實最緊要嘅合作單位，包括專做 EB5 或者同埋其他 Green Card 相關嘅服務嘅法律顧問啦，仲有而家喺全球做得業績最好嘅 Regional Centre 嘅代表啦。咁當然亦都有我哋嘅持牌移民顧問啦，同我哋一齊嘅。咁呢個組合咧就唔係咁容易可以籌組到嘅。咁所以大家如果有啲比較貼身、比較到肉嘅問題咧，咁啊今日記住把握機會發問啦。我哋一陣間咧會有少少 presentation 嘅，咁大家隨時可以喺個熒光幕 Q&A 個位置咧寫低你哋嘅問題，咁之後 Q&A 環節我哋就會逐一咁樣解答㗎啦。今日參加我哋嘅 webinar 嘅朋友咧，亦都可以同我哋預約一個30分鐘嘅免費諮詢嘅。咁聽完之後，如果覺得有呢個需要咧，可以隨時 WhatsApp 我哋啦，即係而家熒光幕上面嗰個WhatsApp number 啦，或者 Q&A box 入邊打低30分鐘，咁我哋之後咧就會同大家安排㗎啦。我哋今日主要咧就用英文去講解嘅，不過有需要嘅話，你哋嘅問題中英文寫都冇問題。咁我喺 Q&A 嘅時候就會幫大家去解答㗎啦。咁我哋去 next page。咁我哋先介紹下我哋今日幾位在座嘅朋友啦。咁我自己我係 Belinda， 咁我就係大家喺香港嘅聯絡站啦。我係 CCGi 嘅創辦人，咁就專責處理移民相關嘅顧問服務啦，亦都係主要做 communication 嗰方面嘅。咁我哋另一位嘅講者都係我哋第一位講者就係 Michael Dai， 咁佢就係我哋嘅法律嘅顧問。咁佢除咗係專責做 Green Card 相關嘅法律諮詢之外咧，其實佢自己亦都係經常去教書，去講好多關於移民法則嘅嘢嘅。咁亦都之前喺美國政府都有一定嘅做嘢嘅 experience 啦。咁第二位講者咧就係 Desmond 係我哋喺亞洲區嘅註冊移民嘅代表。咁喺呢一個移民相關業務已經有超過20年嘅經驗㗎啦。咁我哋同 Desmond 咧，除咗會處理美國相關嘅項目之外咧，亦都會 cover 澳洲、紐西蘭同埋馬來西亞嘅。咁我哋第三位講者啦 Min 咧就係我哋今日嘅即係全球最好嘅呢個 Regional Centre CanAm 嘅代表。咁佢主要嘅specialty 咧就係 Wealth Management 嘅。咁喺呢一個行業亦都有 over 8年嘅經驗㗎啦。咁事不宜遲啦，我哋就轉一轉 channel 啦。Let's start with our presentation with Michael. Michael, off to you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you to all of those who are attending today, and thanks Belinda and Desmond, and it's great to be here to talk to you about EB5 today, and to be in such great company here with you all and with Min from CanAm. So let's just jump right into it. I have a lot of information to cover. So usually when we talk about EB5, I like to start with a very broad overview of what's different about the United States, and then how does the US immigration system work? And then when we understand that a little bit more, we can fit EB-5 into the context and then go right into the specifics about the EB-5 program and how it works. So why the United States? Well, for me, the main box up top in orange, a market of more than 325 million Americans, that is really unique. And I know our esteemed colleagues here and partners, Belinda and Desmond, and you handle Australia, Canada, various other countries in Western Europe, amazing places as well. But I'm a little biased, so I'm gonna just talk about the US and what makes it great. But that alone, I think, is it. 325 million Americans. So if you're looking to move to the US to start a business, opportunities for your kids, no matter where they are in the United States, the US really is a unique place to be. And also the university system. That's probably the #1 factor for most of our clients, specifically in Asia in particular, why they choose the United States. Great universities. And when you get residency in the US, you can get tuition at a much reduced level, which we're going to talk about a little bit more later. And then we don't need to go into too much more detail. As you can see here, very entrepreneurial spirit in the United States. Next slide. Okay, so this slide right here is a unique slide because it represents the economies of each state in the United States and how it compares to the economies of a foreign country. So for example, Canada's economy is the size of Texas's, Florida, Indonesia, and California, where I'm home based. Actually, a more current statistic that didn't make it onto this slide, but California's economy has now surpassed that of the United Kingdom's. So if California were its own country, it would have the 5th largest economy in the world. So no matter where you decide to set up, to live, to reside, do business in the US, every state has some tremendous opportunities out there. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to jump right into the US immigration system and how you get a green card or permanent residency. So in the United States, that's done through one of only 2 ways. Or investment. And we're obviously going to talk about that latter path today, the investment route. But this next slide, we can jump ahead one more slide. This next slide is going to talk about the other types of employment-based categories so we can put EB-5 into the right context. So this slide right here shows EB 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And EB stands for employment-based. And again, the topic for today is EB-5, but I'll go through really quickly these other categories just in case you're doing research online and you see references to these other categories out there. So EB-1, this is generally for people of extraordinary ability, for outstanding researchers and professors, and for multinational managers and executives. So if you're wondering what's extraordinary ability, well, we have a very well-known chef from Shanghai, for example, who decided to set up his own restaurant in the Los Angeles area. Very well known in many newspaper articles, well known on TV as well. He was someone that we brought over as extraordinary ability. So that's just one small example. For EB-2, this is for people who generally have a master's degree or higher. And the government does make an exception. If you have a job and expertise in a field that's in the national interests of the United States, the government will waive a job offer requirement for you to come over, and you can actually self-petition for yourself. But for this category, you definitely, for the most part, should have a master's degree or higher and a job offer. For EB-3, This is the main green card category for workers in the United States. And you generally need a bachelor's level degree or higher or the equivalent and a job offer from a US employer. For EB4, a very special category for religious professionals and also for translators and interpreters that have helped the US military in conflicts abroad. So very, very small category, probably not relevant for today. So we're going to jump right into EB5, and this is the focus for today. And it is technically known as the EB5 Employment Creation Visa category, but it's better known as the Immigrant Investor Visa. Next slide. The EB5 visa was created in 1990 for immigrants seeking to come into the United States and create jobs and put investment into areas of the United States where we need it the most. And the immigration requirements for EB5 have changed a little bit during the past couple of years. In November of 2019, the minimum investment amount to invest in what's called a regional center project went from $500,000 to $900,000. And the investment amount for someone to invest into their own business, for example, if you wanted to set up your own restaurant or your own business in any type of industry in the United States, the minimum level used to be $1 million. That has since went up to 1.8 million. So that's the biggest change that happened very recently here. But the overall intent of this category, when you're thinking about EB5, it was meant to bring money into areas of the United States where we need it the most. And the minimum employment creation requirement is that your investment creates 10 full-time jobs. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along today. Next slide. So if you're wondering, well, we're talking about EB5, who can participate in the EB5 category? Basically anybody can. There's no age, language, education, or prior business experience requirement at all. It is actually very popular for those individuals who may have another pathway to the United States, but the waiting queues are just too long. For example, for some individuals from Mexico and the Philippines, for example, the waiting queues to come to the United States and get a green card in certain categories are more than 20 years. So EB5 is actually a much faster and more expedient way to get to the United States, get a green card, and get your family and kids situated and start working in whatever capacity you're going to do in the United States. And we're going to talk about the timeline and the actual processing for the EB5 category coming up here. Next slide. So what are the advantages of going through the EB5 program? Well, EB5, as I mentioned before, it's a permanent residency visa for the United States. So it gives you a green card, and you can live and work anywhere in the United States with this green card. So if you make your investment in New York, for example, you can live in California. You don't have to live where you invest. You can get access to education at significantly lower rates. So when you get residency and you establish residency in the United States, the tuition levels drop significantly at many top-rated universities all throughout the United States. And we have a couple of slides coming up here that will show you just how significant that tuition drop is. So if you've got 2 or 3 kids, for example, or just one, you can save tens of thousands of dollars just by going through the EB5 program yourself. One key factor that is really unique about the US program as compared to some of the other international investment options out there, you can get a US passport and US citizenship through this program. So EB5 gets you a green card, and then if you decide to seek citizenship, you can file for US citizenship generally 5 years after you enter and become a resident in the United States. So that option's out there if you want it. If you don't want it, if you just want to stay a green card holder, you can do that for life too. You don't have to become a US citizen. One of the key things that we just like to mention these days with COVID and the interesting world environment that we're in now is that US residents and US citizens are generally not included in any of the travel bans that the United States has had, especially during the Trump administration, which is now at an end, and we have President Biden and a totally new outlook on immigration. So, so many positive things on the horizon with that, and we'll mention that a bit later as well. But that is a key benefit too. And the last point on the slide there, I like to mention because some people who may already be in the United States on a non-immigrant investor visa called the E2, they can actually use that E2 visa or that E2 investment that they've made and contribute that towards the amount needed to qualify for EB-5. And so if that pertains to you or anybody listening, we can go into more detail later, but won't spend too much time on that today. Next slide. So I mentioned the benefits for tuition savings through education in the United States. Many of you may not be aware if you haven't spent much time in the US, but the US system of education has some significant benefits. There's free access to education in the United States for 13 years, free transportation to public schools. And I mentioned, multiple times already, reduced in-state tuition at the university level. And if we see the next slide, we'll show exactly how significant that impact is. Next slide. So this is just one example. If you look at in-state versus out-of-state tuition, for example, $10,116 for 1 year in the 2019-2020 academic year, as compared to out-of-state $22,577. So that's more than twice the savings. So for example, if you're looking to send your child or yourself to the University of California, Berkeley, one of the best schools in the United States, the savings, as you can see, is between more than half. And this is just representative. I think the savings that you would actually get at UC Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley, is even greater, savings of $15,000 to $18,000 per year. So just one example that shows the benefits of getting EB-5 and getting residency in the States. Next slide. So if you're wondering, okay, you have a decent sense about what EB-5 is after the few quick slides that we've shown here today. So you're wondering, how does it actually work? Well, we'll talk now about the actual application process, what we do to get you through this program. So it involves 3 steps. So the first step is that you work with a law firm to help you with all of your document preparation and collecting the required items that we need for your filings. And you work with a qualified immigration provider like CCGi to help you determine what's best for you and your family, what fits specifically for your needs. And then you select the regional center and the project that you want to make your investment in. And again, we're lucky to have CanAm on the discussion here as well. And I just want to mention, I don't work for CanAm and they don't pay me any money to say this, but we've had investors in their projects for many, many years. They've all had nothing but positive things to say. And so when our investors choose regional made a good decision. So number one, the investor chooses the lawyer, the immigration service provider, and then the regional center where they want to make their investment. And for those of you who haven't done a ton of research on EB-5, if you're wondering what a regional center is and how this works, well, regional centers are actually private, they can be private companies located all throughout the United States with authorization to participate in the EB-5 program. And basically what they do is solicit foreign investment funds from investors all throughout the world to build these large commercial or residential property development projects. And that's what they do. They pool your investor funds with investors from Brazil or the Middle East or elsewhere in Asia to build these large projects. And when I started doing EB-5 back at the end of 2007, which was a long time ago for the EB-5 world, I think there were only about 25 or 30 regional centers that were operating. And I definitely believe CanAm was in the mix at that time. But if you compare that to today, there are about 670 operating regional centers out there today. So the program has just grown immensely in popularity. And the choice out there is huge. So it is really, really important to make a good choice on where you invest and what regional center you go with. So once the investor decides on the project, they deposit the $900,000 investment that's required by law to participate in this program with the EB-5 regional center. There's usually an administrative fee associated with that, and then you have your legal and government filing fees as well. Once that's done, the bank will give us a confirmation that those funds have been invested in relation to the EB-5 project, and we include that investment confirmation funds letter with your filing. We put everything together, submit it to the United States government, which is the US Citizenship and Immigration Service. Once we submit that documentation to the government, then we'll wait. Current waiting times are around a month to 2 to get your receipt notice. It's just because it's a little backlogged right now with COVID. But normally within a few weeks, we'll get a receipt notice that has your case number for your EB-5. And that's scheduling of the visa interview at the US Embassy or consulate in where you're living. Normally, the visa interview process for EB-5 is very straightforward and pretty easy. I've had clients go through EB-5 interviews in less than 5 minutes, actually. They don't ask you a lot of questions. They might ask you a couple of questions on where you invested. Make sure that nothing's changed since the time that you filed the application and so forth. Once that's done, your visa is issued in your passport. So you'll actually get an EB-5 visa stamped in your passport. And you have up to 6 months to make that first entry to the United States. And when you enter the United States that first time, you are a conditional green card holder or a conditional permanent resident. And that just means we have to do one more thing. And that's step 3 of this process. We have to file what's called an I-829 petition. And that is to ask the government to remove those conditions from your green card and give you a permanent green card. And we do that by showing the government that you've left your money in that investment, like you said, do for whatever terms that you agreed to in the investment. And I believe Min from CanAm is going to talk specifically about a regular project, one of their current projects, so you can actually see how this works in a practical sense. But once you've left that money in there, the government sees that you haven't taken it out early and that 10 jobs were created based on your investment. And again, that's going to be provided with the documentation that the regional center provides. Once we've satisfied all of those requirements, the government will give you a permanent green card. And once you have that permanent green card, you can stay a permanent resident for life if you'd like. or you do have the option 5 years after your first footprint in the United States to become a US citizen. And so that if that's something that you're interested in doing, we can certainly help you with that as well. Or you can stay a green card holder for life. But that is the entire EB-5 process. And so children under 21. So you can all go as one family unit under one investment, and you all follow the same process. And that is about as fast of an overview as I can give. I know we don't have too much time on this current webinar, but I'm happy to speak with any of you individually about the specifics on the application process, timing, and so forth. And we can also address that during the Q&A after we finish, but I don't want to take too much of my colleagues' time up here. So we'll move on to the next slide. Now, these are 3 key requirements I just want to mention briefly because I always like to hit these points just for you as the investor should be aware of. So by law, the EB-5 program requires that your money must be, quote, at risk. So that means that a regional center cannot guarantee a return of your investment. But just because your money's at risk doesn't mean it has to be a risky investment. And so this goes back to making sure you invest with a good regional center with a great track record and someone that's been doing this for a long time. And I think Desmond is going to address some of these issues later, so I won't go too much into detail on that. I do want to point out that the annual return that you're in a ton of money in the short term. That's not the point of EB-5. The investment is just getting your residency. That's the real investment. But there is generally some form of a minimal annual return, and I'll leave that to CanAm to discuss what that is. But generally speaking, over the years, it is not much. It's generally 0 to 2%. And this varies depending on what year we're in, but generally very minimal. So again, the investment's a green card. And I do want to mention really briefly here, the source of funds. So this is probably the most important point when we put together your EB-5 petition and getting you through the program is the lawful source of funds component. And that is a component that suggests that we must show the government that the money you're using to invest was earned lawfully. And so we do that through a whole bunch of different ways. We've been putting these petitions together for many years, and we've seen just about every scenario you can think of. We've helped investors from Iran all the way to Hong Kong many times and down to Brazil and throughout the world. So we're used to seeing different ways to put your source of funds packages together. And that's one of money and the source of funds. And normally that's through tax returns if you live in a jurisdiction where taxes are required. For example, I'm traveling, I have an office here, but I'm in Dubai at the moment. But tax returns are not a critical component for proving source of funds in this region in the Middle East. We use other types of evidence to document source of funds. And that includes bank statements, employment contracts, salary slips. So whatever it is, we can work with you to get the documentation that we need. But that is very important for getting through the EB-5 program, is making sure we show the government that that money was earned lawfully. Next slide. And just recapping what makes a strong EB-5 case, just working with you, the investor, to get good documents, good civil documents, marriage, divorce, birth records, police and medical clearances are required. So if you've lived in a lot of different countries during your life, we may need to get police clearance certificates from those countries. And we've been doing this again for most of the main countries around the world that would be relevant for this situation. So we can help you get those clearances and get through that. You do have to have a medical examination before getting your visa stamped in your passport. It's a very easy physical examination, so nothing to worry about with that. Getting detailed source of funds documents, as I just mentioned, usually tax returns, bank statements. Some people sell a piece of property to fund their EB-5 investment. If that's the case, then we would get the property records that you had from purchasing the property initially, and then your sale documents and so forth. So whatever it is, we'll work with you to get what we need. Regional center documentation, working with a good, strong regional center is probably, again, top two things to get you through EB-5. One is proving where the money came from, and two, you definitely want to pick the right regional center because that's key to getting through this whole process. So working with a good regional center who's been doing this a long time, who has a great track record in supporting their investors, that's very key. And then also you have to have a good, strong local agent. That is of utmost importance, an agent that you can trust, that's on the ground where you are, and that can help you with the day-to-day inquiries as well. So very important. Next slide. And we get asked a lot of times during these seminars, you know, how much time do you have to spend in the United States to keep your residency? I get asked that probably in every seminar I've held over the years. So the US has a unique system. There's no minimum number of days you have to spend in the US to keep your green card. But my advice always to investors is to enter the United States at least once every 6 months, and definitely don't be outside the US for longer than a year. If you're outside the US for longer than a year, the government's going to have deemed that you've abandoned your permanent residency, and then we've got to go to immigration court and fight with the government to try to get it back. So definitely don't want to be outside the US for longer than a year. There is something that you can do though. If you think you're going to be outside the US for a long period of time. If, for example, you have an elderly family member that you need to go back and take care of, or if a job is going to take you outside of the US for an extended period of time, we can get what's called a re-entry permit for you. And that is basically advance permission from the government to allow you to be outside the US for a period of up to 2 years. And we can generally extend this permit several times. So if you know that's something that's going to be facing you or your family, you just let us know in advance. And we have to apply for it when you're in the United States in advance of your travel. And again, we can work with you to get that all sorted and situated. You just need to let us know or let your immigration law firm know. Next slide. And that is a super, super quick overview of EB-5. I know I went through this at a rapid pace, and I'm sure many of you will be thinking and you have questions, and very, very happy to answer anything that you have and happy to speak with you individually. I know a lot of times EB-5 is personal, so you don't feel comfortable asking questions in a group forum or anything like that. So I'm sure Belinda can arrange something, and we're more than happy to talk to you individually. But with that, I will hand it over to Desmond. And I think he's going to talk more about some of the things you need to watch out for with EB-5.
Thanks, Mike. Hi, 大家好，我係 Desmond，元宵節快樂。And sorry for not so good Cantonese, and that's all I can speak. Yeah, very quickly, I guess, I wanted to share with you the next 2 slides. As what Mike had just shared with you, there are 2 important aspects in this whole entire EB-5 programs. Not only you must meet all the criteria required for the EB-5 to be granted, but choosing the regional center and the right projects is equally important for you to get a success, outcome of your application. Now, these two slides would help you to understand how do we qualify a regional center, and importantly, what are the questions that you should be asking to determine if it is a good project, and more importantly, if it is a right regional center. Yeah, and this is going to help you to listen through the next speaker, which is Min, who will be talking about the projects in more detail. Yeah. Now, first of all, I would always ask, now when we decide who to work with, in this case, when we decide to work with CanAm, we do look into how long have they been around, what is their history. We wanted to understand, how do they perform over the years? Like what Mike had just shared with you, CanAm is the pioneer, one of the pioneer when this EB5 and regional started many years ago. And they are very well established, even though throughout the years and until today. And if you talk about CanAm, I guess, everybody heard about them. Yeah. And certainly you wanted to also find out how many applications, especially the I-526 and I-829 has been approved through the regional center. I-526 is to get you a conditional green card. I-829 is to get the conditional lifted. And through the number, you are able to tell how many clients have they gone through successfully over the years. Of course, you wanted to also look at, the investment payback records. So it is important to also to ask the question whether or not this investment payment records is being audited independently. So ask for an independent records to see what is the records, of the investment that has been paid back over the years. Yeah, and I'm sure Ming has more to share with you later on about these parts. Now, number 4, you wanted to look into what is the composition of this loan or this financing that is being raised to fund the projects. Now, whether or not the owners participated in the projects equally, and whether or not how much is the percentage of the bank loan that has been approved for the projects. Yeah, and likewise, how much is the percentage of the EB5, the fund that is coming from EB5. Now, the percentage of the bank loan does give some indication on, how stable is this project, whether or not the bank will grant the loans. Yeah, and you would also wanted to make sure that there is also certain percentage that the owner or the project's owner has invested equally. So you wanted to make sure that there's a common investor interest in the project and not putting majority of the percentage on the EB5. Yeah. Number of the job creation for each investor. Now, each of these projects, there's this project paper, and the number of the project creation going to be created is defined in this project's paper. And you wanted to make sure that there is enough allowance given per investor. For example, typically you would want to avoid a project that is creating 10, for example, because 10 is the minimum. But if the project is giving you 20 jobs creation per each investor, this generally is good because it does give a buffer. If should the number drops, you still have the buffer to meet the minimum requirements. All right. So next, you also wanted to find out like paybacks security. Should the projects goes wrong, what is the collateral and what is the payback security in the loan agreement. Yeah, you wanted to make sure that there is enough assets that can be disposed of. For example, in this case, yeah, if the project goes wrong, there's enough assets that can be liquidated to pay back the investor. Okay, so next slide, please. And 7, how much is the management fee? Now, every project, and there is a fee charged by the regional center. Now, my advice over to you here is do not get too excited when you see the project management fee is too low. You should be cautious about, somebody who tell you the management fee is, there's a waiver on the management fee, or, relatively when you see the management fee is too low. So, you wanted to ask why, because there is a market practice. And if the management fee is too low, should there be any concern, to attract, to be seen as competitive and attracts you to get into the projects? Yeah, so these are the questions that you wanted to pay attention as well. Now, next, the percentage of the returns on the investment. Again, do not get too excited when you see, they are paying you 5% returns, for example, because it doesn't make sense that, they are paying you for such a high returns on your investment, 900,000 investment, when they are paying almost the same as, the interest to raise a bank loan. Yeah, so like what Michael had shared with you earlier, typically, in the market, the return is so minimum, and sometimes, the return is almost 0%. Yeah, so my advice over here is to make sure that it is a right project, it is a right regional center, and secure your principal, secure your investment, and look into the payment records to make sure that these regional center pay back all investor on time, after, according to the duration in the agreement. Okay. Number 9, this is very important, especially the investment fund, whether or not, ask the question, whether or not the investment fund of your 900,000 will be redeployed to other projects. Yeah. You wanted to make sure that whether or not the regional center has the rights to do so, and whether or not they will be deployed to other projects without your consent. And we have seen in the market, that certain regional center or certain projects completed too early before before filing the I-829. Especially for those coming from the country that has such a long queue. Yeah, where the project is completed, the fund can't be released back to you, and is redeployed to other projects where you have no control and the risk of the projects. And make sure that, all these questions is being raised and addressed, yeah, for you to determine. But of course, our role over here is to make sure that we have qualified and presented you with the best regional center, and this is our priority. Okay, so that's all my sharing with you today. Feel free to ask any question if you have pertaining to the projects, and I'm going to hand over to the next speaker, Ming, who will be sharing with you more, on what is the projects that are currently available by CanAm. Ming, over to you.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. Thank you, Desmond. Thank you, Mike, for all the kind words about CanAm. We have been around for so long, and we can do what we do with all the partners like you guys. Really sincerely, thank you guys. Happy Lantern Festival, everybody. Thank you for choosing to spend the time with us tonight to learn more about EB5. So for my short presentation, I wanted to share a little bit more about, CanAm, my company, what we do, what a regional center do really. And, for the other part, I'm going to just talk very briefly about our current EB5 project. So CanAm, we were established in 1987. At the beginning, we were actually focused on the Canadian business immigration program. We have done very well with the Canadian program as well. But since early 2000, or 2001 to be specific, our founder, Mr. Tom Rosenfeld, he shifted our focus to the US EB5 program. And we established our first regional center. As Mike mentioned, I think at that time, we're probably, the first 1 or 2 regional center existed at that time. Since then, it has been a great journey. We have become one of the largest and the best regional center in the EB5 industry. And we are very proud of what we have achieved. And we cannot do that with all the investors who trusted us over the years. So as of now, we have raised over $3 billion in EB5 capital for 60 different projects. We are headquartered in New York City. So, if you ever in New York, always welcome to stop by our office. But we also have rep office in Shanghai, Beijing, Delhi, Ho Chi Minh, as well as Singapore. That's where I am currently located. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about CanAm's structure and why we are structured this way. So as we all know, the EB5 immigration program, it's for immigration. So for investors' individual petition, it's governed by USCIS. However, it's also an investment, and in the US, it's considered a private security investment. And the government entity who govern this type of investment is the Security Exchange Commission, as well as FINRA. So to make sure that our investment is fully in compliance with the US security law, we're actually the first regional center to set up our own FINRA registered broker-dealer and our SEC registered advisory firm. So I am dual licensed. I'm a licensed broker and licensed financial advisors. Because when we talk to EB5 investors about their immigration investment, yes, I'm giving you advice on your immigration, but I'm also giving you advice on your investment to help you understand the risk associated with your investment. We also have an independent private equity real estate investment platform. So that is for investors who are interested in our non-immigration commercial real estate investment. We do have a lot of very loyal EB5 investors that have successfully completed their immigration and received their capital repayment with us. So they continue to invest with us on other commercial real estate projects. Next slide. Okay, this is just a kind of snapshot of our team here. As you can see, we have a very diverse team at CanAm, and yeah, we treat each other like families. Yeah, next slide, please. Okay, so what is a regional center? A lot of investors really find this confusing. The one question I get often is that, so you guys run and operate 7 regional centers, that means you have 7 offices in these different locations? That is not the case. A regional center is a designation you apply and receive from USCIS. Once you receive this designation, you can sponsor EB5 project in these specific geographic area. So for CanAm, all our EB5 projects are going to be located in either in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, California, New York metropolitan area, Florida, Hawaii, as well as Texas. As Mike mentioned earlier, it doesn't matter where you invest. You can invest in Pennsylvania and live in California. Where you invest is not associated with where an investor chooses to live in the United States. So usually, we only have one open project accepting new investor, under one regional center across all the 7. So because, it's the same project team, so we only sponsor one project at a time. So next slide, please. Okay, this is my favorite slide because it really kind of gives an essence of what we do as an independent regional center. So CanAm is an independent regional center, meaning that we are not associated with any developer. We are not obligated to raise money for any developer. Instead, we go to the market and choose the best project we can find. And our job is to make that the project we choose meet both the immigration requirement as well as qualify to be a good financial investment. How we do that is through very comprehensive immigration and financial due diligence. So for the immigration due diligence, we will do economic impact study. We will do a job creation study. Again, these are very complicated studies that we hire professional consultant to do, and I'm happy to discuss more on how we do it, but it's just very complicated. So once we run these studies, we also have to understand the construction timeline and the construction status of the project, because EB-5 jobs, these 10 full-time jobs, are created through construction spending. So it's very, very important that this project will complete its construction so the job creation can happen to secure an investor's immigration. Once we make sure that the immigration due diligence is completed and met the requirement, we will start doing our financial due diligence, which is even more complicated. You know, we work with different developers across the United States. So we have to really check developers' track record. We review their business plan. We review their project budget, source of financing. We have to make sure they have secured finance from the bank. You know, who are the equity investors in the project? What is the project currently valued at? There's a long list of due diligence questions we have to go through before we decide if this is a project that we wanted to sponsor. So once that's done, we will start working with our lawyers, our legal team, to put together the investment offering. That's when we go to the market to offer the project to our investors around the world, to help them sign the subscription agreement to remit the capital so they can start their EB-5 immigration journey. Next slide, please. So, you know, traditionally, majorities of EB-5 projects are real estate projects. That is because, you know, as I mentioned, EB-5 jobs are created through construction. So, you know, real estate are constructions. However, that is not the only EB-5 projects you can do. You know, we actually done a lot of infrastructure projects. We actually worked with large corporations to use EB-5 capital to, you know, produce movies. So as you can see there, you know, our partners, they usually are large developers and large corporations, as well as universities. We've done a lot of student housing projects with Tampa universities, with Hawaii universities of Hawaii. So it's a very diverse portfolios of projects we have done. Next slide, please. Track record, right? I feel like we spend a lot of time talk about how important it is to look at a regional center, the organization's track record. We understand that when an investor make an EB-5 investment, even though USCIS require your capital have to be at risk, but nobody wanted to make a high risk investment for their immigration. The purpose of this investment is to secure your immigration and repay your capital back at the end of your immigration. So we take a very conservative approach when it comes to project selection. We will never put our investor in speculative investment for the immigration purpose. We have non-immigration related investment that you can take as much risk as you like to get high returns, but EB-5 investment is not that type of investment. So because of our conservative approach, you know, we are very, very proud that we have a 100% success rate when it comes to immigration, meaning that we never had a project that failed to secure our investors' immigration. We have, you know, more than 14,000 conditional green card approvals. These include these petitioners' family members, and we have more than 7,400 permanent green cards that have been granted to our investors. We do have a dozen investors whose I-526 petition or I-829 petition are denied, but these denials are due to their personal reasons. So, you know, as we know, USCIS look at the project, but they also look at who you are. So unfortunately, some investor had minor criminal record or high, you know, very sensitive ties with certain government that would disqualify them. So it's very, very important to work with experienced immigration attorney to vary your source of funds and to also to make sure there's nothing in your background that would disqualify you. From my experience, a good immigration attorney would just tell you, no, we don't think you should pursue EB-5 because we think most likely your source of funds will be denied. And I'm sure Mike has seen source of funds and he's just like, I don't feel comfortable taking on these clients. we have all seen cash in a duffel bag in our career, and that's not what we are comfortable with. In terms of capital repayment, you are not going to find another regional center that have a more impressive capital repayment record than we do. So we, at this point, have repaid $1.75 billion back to our investors. So these are from 45 matured EB5 projects we have done since 2001. Even last year during COVID, I know a lot of projects had difficulties, but we still repaid 5 projects last year. And one of the projects we repaid $350 million. That is the single largest EB5 repayment in history. I like to always give our investor full disclosure. As I mentioned earlier, you are making an investment, so there are investment risk. So we do have one project, a small project, 36 investors in it. All of them received their permanent green card, but unfortunately, the project ran into financial troubles, and it's a loan. We made an EB5 loan, so we end up go through bankruptcy proceedings with the borrower. We auctioned off the collaterals, which are the land and some of the buildings they own, and we repaid these 36 investors 45% of their original EB5 investment. So that is the only kind of troubled project we had through our entire history. I like to share this with our investor, and we definitely learn our lesson from it. So it's very important, not just for the investor, also for us to look at every investment we choose very closely to make sure that this is as safe as we can get. Next slide, please. So we often get asked how we know your track record is real, right? We're not a public traded company, but what we do is we actually work with the third-party CPA firm that we provide all our repayment banking informations. We provide all the petition approval informations to this accounting firm. So they do a full audit on us every year. And the audit report, we are always open to share the full audit report with our potential investors if you are interested to review. Next slide. Okay, I think we can skip this one. Next. Okay, I'm just gonna give a very high level review of our Jefferson Terminal project. It's a very unique energy infrastructure project that are sponsored by the Fortress Group, which is one of the largest investment group in the United States. Next slide, please. So Jefferson Terminal, it's an energy product logistic terminal. They are located at Port of Belmont, Texas. So this is a project under our Texas Regional Center. This region is North America's largest refining and petrochemical centers. So the project is owned and operated by a company called Fortress Transportation and Infrastructure Investor. I know the name is so long. They are a public traded company, and their ticker is FTAI, F-T-A-I. I'm just going to refer to the company as FTAI going forward. Because they're a public traded company, you can actually find tons of information about the project owner and their financial information online, which personally I think that's really great because it gives our investor more transparencies. Jefferson Terminal is a public-private partnership between the local government and the project operator. That is a very important factor because later on when we look at the project financing, you will see that the local government have provided a lot of financial support to the project. So the Jefferson Terminal has been in operation since the early 2012. And our project here, the construction is an expansion of the facility. We are going to expand the storage and pipeline connectivities capacity at Jefferson Terminal to kind of strengthen its relationship with its key customers in the region. We can move on to the next slide. This kind of little slide here is really just to help you understand what Jefferson does and how it makes money. So Jefferson, as I mentioned earlier, is a logistics service provider, and the services they provide are mostly storage and transportation. So their customers are some of the world's largest refineries and oil producers. I'm just going to use ExxonMobil as example because it's one of their largest customer and they have long-term agreement with each other. So ExxonMobil is a large refineries in the region. When they get crude oil in as raw material, they are going to store the oil at Jefferson's facility, and Jefferson will charge a fee for the storage. And once ExxonMobil refine the product and they need to get the petroleum product to the market, again, they have to go through Jefferson Terminal's rail system. They have to go through its pipeline so the product can go to different markets. For instance, a lot of their products are actually exported to Mexico. So, they are a pure service provider to these large refineries and oil producers. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned before, this is not a brand new project. It's an expansion of an existing facility. So there are two parts of the expansion. These are the construction part. This is the good stuff. This is where the job come from. So for the construction, we have they build a new storage crude oil tanks, and they build new rail tracks to connect Jefferson Terminal with the statewide rail system. And the other part of the expansion construction is to build 3 new pipelines to connect Jefferson Terminal directly with its largest customers, which is ExxonMobil, Motiva, and the oil producers in the region. The construction started in late 2019, and it wasn't affected by COVID because this is an essential business. So throughout 2020, the construction was ongoing on schedule. And we are scheduled for the entire construction to be completed by before end of June this year, actually. And at this point, this project has already generated more than 2,000 EB5 qualifying jobs. So each EB5 investor in this project will end up getting 40 qualifying jobs to secure your permanent green card when you are ready to submit your I-829 petition. Personally, this really is very important because it took out the immigration risk from the project site. The only immigration risk that investors are still to have is your source of funds and if there anything sensitive in your personal background. Next slide, please.
Yeah, we may need to go a little bit faster because we are a bit overrun, and I'm trying to cover a few questions before we.
Got it. Yeah? Okay. Yeah. Why don't we skip this then?
Thank you.
No problem. Yeah. Next slide. Okay. I think this is probably the most important because we want to know why this investment is I wouldn't use the word safe. I would say is properly structured and is secured. So first of all, we look at the equity component of the entire project. The project owner, FTAI, has invested more than $700 million of their own equity capital in the project. And that make up more than 60% of the project's entire capital stack. The other thing is the actual construction is funded by EB5 capital as well as government loan. This is the local government support I was referring to earlier. So the local government have issued more than $260 million of municipal bonds to support the Jefferson Terminal expansion. These bonds are successfully issued in early 2020, and all the capital from the bonds have been invested in the project already. And if you ask me who are investing in these bonds, these are usually large investment institutions in United States. And EB5, we are a very, very small components of the project. The project don't really need EB5 capital at this point, but we had a very long collaborating history with the borrower. So they decided to, continue to work with us in this project. So we are in total going to raise $7.2 million EB5 capital for the project. As you can see there, we are doing in two tranches. Tranche 1 of $26.1 million has already been raised and invested in the company. We are doing the tranche 2 raise now. So both the government loan and the EB5 loan, we are senior loan. We have a first lien position on the total assets of Jefferson Terminal, which is valued at $1.24 billion. So if anything goes wrong, we can sell the terminal to pay us back. And because we're such a small component, I think it would be pretty crazy for the project's owner to give up the project for $70.2 million, while the project itself actually worth more than $1 billion. So that's the reason that we think the project structure is very, very safe for our EB5 investor. The next slide, please. Okay, just a quick one sentence on the borrower. As I said, we worked with them twice before, and one of our previous collaboration, the loan has already been repaid last year. It's a $350 million EB5 loan used to build a private train line in Florida. Next slide, please. Okay, this is going to be my last slide. I'm just gonna quickly talk through why we like the project. So first, as I mentioned before, we choose which borrower we wanted to work with. It's very important that we work with high quality borrower. In this case, Fortress and FTI and its parent company, Fortress Investment Group, they are just one of the largest investment company in the US, very, very reputable. Strong government support. These are not just verbal support, these are actual financial support. You can see the loan that's been raised. Very strong collateral. The collateral value is very high for the EB5 loan. Minimum immigration risk because the job creation has already been completed. And the last is that the region's economic outlook is very strong. Jefferson Terminal's revenue is very, very stable because it contract with Fortune 500 companies, and these contracts is 10 to 15 years contract. So very stable revenue for them. Next slide. So this is just a quick summary. As Mike mentioned earlier, the latest EB5 program regulation require the minimum investment amount in a TEA area to be $900K. And we do have first lien on the collateral. 40 jobs will be available for each EB5 investor. The loan term for this project is a 5-year loan with 2 1-year extension options. I know we're short of time and I know there are a lot of questions, so I'm going to stop here and so we can start actually, discuss some questions from the audience.
Thank you, all three of you. Let's dive into the questions right away. So I think we have touched on some of the answers already. So just a quick recap. The first one is, so where are the money invested? I think we touched on that already. So how to create the 10 jobs? Is the regional center going to create it for the investor? And then what are the biggest risks with EB5?
Right. I think I kind of talked about that a little bit because, EB5 jobs, EB5 qualified jobs are counted through construction spending. So you have to actually spend the capital and you have to show spending receipt that the project has been completed to show that they have created the EB5 jobs. So if you look at the risk of a EB5, you have immigration risk, right? That is, what if the project doesn't finish? What if the construction, spending didn't materialize? Then your permanent green card is at risk. So it's very important to verify if the project has already secured all the financing to actually complete construction. And then you have financial risk, which is different for each project. And you have to actually look at the project to understand where is the financial risk. Yeah.
Okay. So will any EB5 applications be rejected? If it's rejected in the middle of the process, will the investor be able to get a percentage of the investment back?
Yes, we actually have clause in our offering document stating that if investor's I-526 is denied due to source of funds, so this is assuming that the investor has diligently worked with their immigration attorney to prepare the petition. So in that case, if you are still denied, we do have refund policy in place where investor will get their entire investment, 900K back. I do believe the timeline is within 120 to 150 days. Yeah.
Okay. Good. So the news has mentioned about regional centers will expire by the end of June. So if any of the regional centers are being discontinued after that and investors has already invested the 900K, what will happen to the investment?
So first of all, yes, we do have another deadline, sunset date for the EB5 program. You know, our regional center, we're very involved in lobbying for the program, and we are quite confident that the program will get reauthorized. For investors who invested before June, I feel like this is something that might be better addressed by Mike, you know, the legal expert here. But just from our 30 years of experience working with USCIS, they have never applied, you know, regulations or law retrospectively. So if a petition is already submitted before the deadline, it should be still governed under the current rule. Mike, I don't know if you have, you know, more insight on this. Oh, you're muted.
Oh, Mike, yeah, you're on mute.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think from our professional opinion and what we advise investors is that I think the pending and the legislation that's under review, the Integrity and Reform Act, that's going to be the next EB5 legislation. I think some form of that is going to get passed. We've gone through these types of reauthorizations, although this one's a little different, but we've gone through similar things for many, many years with EB5. I'm confident that something's going to get passed. As Min mentioned, when we go through these changes, the US government generally never applies anything retroactively. Yeah, I feel very confident that investors are going to be okay.
Great, sounds good for investors. So next question, you know, the taxation system in Hong Kong is really, really simple and direct. So if anyone is planning to get a green card or go into EB5 program, any taxation planning they should do beforehand?
All right. Yeah, sure. Let me take this question. I guess most of the migrants, beside the immigration matter, the tax implication has always been one of the biggest concerns. Now, it is true that the United States apply this worldwide tax incomes once the green card is granted. Now, having said that, there's still way to mitigate and address or do a proper tax planning. Most of the times, if the green card is for the purpose of the children's education and the wife being there in the United States to accompany the children's, then you might want to consider having the husband away from the application. So the husband doesn't necessarily need to be included in this application. So then the worldwide tax income doesn't apply. And should the husband be decided to move on at a later stage, there are ways to get the husband's, you know, a green card. Yeah. So this is the general directions that most of the people would adopt.
Yeah, but actually, because taxation planning is actually crucial, so we would definitely recommend anyone who's going away, migrating to other places, to get a taxation consultant for more details, because every case is actually quite personal and quite different. Okay, next question. Will anything contribute to the discontinuation of investor projects? And if it got discontinued, what will happen to the investments?
Again, because it's crucial, at least for the construction to be completed. So, you know, without the completion of the construction, the project itself, the investors' immigration status cannot be secured. However, if after the job creation is completed, if the project has having operating issues and not being able to in business, I do believe that's kind of not, you know, the investor can still secure their immigration. It just, you know, this is what I learned through my discussion with a lot of immigration attorneys. But you know, in our operation history, we haven't really run into that problem yet, that a construction completed, but the project is no longer in operation. I do believe they're still qualified to receive the permanent green card. Mike, I can be wrong on that one.
Yeah, this is it's a really technical issue, and everything depends on timing. And it gets really complicated when you look at the specifics, but stepping back overall, yeah, absolutely. There are still ways in most cases in this type of project, if the spending's already been made, for the investors to get through. And we've helped other investors in similar projects do so. So yeah, I mean, in the project you presented today, I wouldn't see too much of a concern.
Okay. So we have also heard about things like regional centers can move investors' investments in between projects without actually notifying the investors. So if that happens, how do the investors mitigate the risk related to it?
So first of all, we would never do that. These are things that clearly written in the offering document, that your funds will stay in the project that you select. If your immigration process took longer than the long term, and your investment have to be reinvested, as we call it, to maintain your immigration, these are things that regional center have to inform investor. In our case, we actually require the investor's second consent. So if a regional center document actually tells you they can move around your investment, I do think investors have to be extremely cautious on that. Yeah.
Okay. So with the new Biden government, seems a lot of sectors got really positive and excited about the new regulations and so on. Anything that if we are looking into the EB5 path, anything regulatory that we should pay attention to, or we can get any insight from you guys?
Yeah, I mean, just speaking briefly, I think we're in a whole different phase with immigration right now. We've been in 4 years of President Trump's basically, you know, I'm not saying this politically, I'm not taking any sides, but it's been a very tough situation for immigrants, and a tough situation immigration-wise. What we're seeing now is completely different. President Biden's only been in office for barely a month, and he's rescinding and revoking basically one by one every obstruction that President Trump put up. Just for example, he's already removed the so-called Muslim ban, which provided obstacles for individuals coming from mainly Muslim countries like Iran, Iraq, Sudan, Libya, and elsewhere. That's gone. He's already stopped the regulation in place or the executive memorandum that made Mexicans who were seeking asylum in the United States wait in Mexico while their asylum case is pending. So that's gone. There's already talk of establishing a permanent pathway to citizenship for more than 11 million undocumented migrants in the United States, mainly from Mexico and Latin America. This is something for decades that has been talked about, but has never been actually gotten this far even. So I think everything from now on is positive. I don't see why EB-5 would be anything other than positive.
Great, sounds good. So last question, will there be any safer investment options? And do the investors get to choose, or the regional centers will choose for them?
All right, let me finish the last question, I guess. Well, pertaining to this question, I guess my first advice to everyone out there is to look at when you talk about choosing the right investment and the projects. I think anything beyond that is you should be looking at a bigger picture. First of all, how established is the regional center? So a lot of people make mistake by looking at the projects alone, but and not focusing enough on the regional center, the reputation of the regional center. The project could be packaged as very attractive, but there are a lot of the agenda and the question that one might not be able to understand clearly. But if you're looking at a reliable and reputable regional center, and each and every project that they represented is going to fulfill all the factors that I have went through with you guys earlier. You know, they will be looking at the financing components, making sure the owner's equity is relatively higher than the EB-5. They'll make sure that, you know, the payback, they'll make sure that, you know, the collateral is secured. So look, my advice is look at the regional center. From the regional center, look into then individual projects. Yeah. So, and most of the times, the regional center would represent one project at one time. So depending on what is your timing, yeah, for example, the Jefferson projects at the moment with CanAm. So we have clients that has gone through the Jefferson projects. And honestly speaking, myself, I have looked through many projects, and this is one of the very excited projects for myself personally.
Great. Thank you very much, you guys. Thank you, all the speakers. Thank you for staying with us, and sorry about cutting into your dinner time. I hope you find our sharing and information useful, and please jot down our number. If you have any further questions, feel free to message us. So let's say a goodbye to everyone. 元宵節快樂，咁多位，拜拜，Good night.
Thanks.
Thank you guys.
Thank you everyone.
Bye bye for now.